Liam Vance believed he had closed the most painful chapter of his life. The divorce from Clara was a clean break, or so his mother assured him. 8 months of curated success, strategic dates, and the deafening silence of his penthouse had almost convinced him she was right. He was Liam Vance, heir to the Vance Industries fortune, a man whose life was measured in stock prices and acquisitions, not messy emotions. But then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, in a place he never should have been, he saw her. And the lie he'd built his new life upon shattered in a single impossible instant. Before him stood his ex-wife Clara, her hands resting on the gentle, undeniable curve of a heavily pregnant belly. 8 months. 243 days to be precise. Liam Vance had counted them at first, each tick of his platinum Patek Philippe, a reminder of what he had lost, or rather what he had been forced to discard. His marriage to Clara Rossi was now just a memory, a ghost that haunted the sprawling minimalist expanse of his Manhattan penthouse. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds, a kingdom he was destined to inherit. He ran Vance Industries North American Acquisitions, a title that came with a corner office, a 9-figure trust, and the crushing weight of his family's expectations. The Vances weren't just wealthy. They were a dynasty, their name etched onto university halls and hospital wings. And dynasties, as his mother Eleanor Vance reminded him daily, required one thing above all else: an heir. That had been the wound that festered, the crack that had shattered their marriage. He and Clara had tried for 3 years. 3 years of sterile clinics, hushed consultations with a Dr. Miller, and a calendar dictated by ovulation cycles. Each negative test was a small death, a quiet erosion of the easy laughter that had once filled their home. Liam remembered the initial diagnosis from Dr. Miller, delivered in a somber, apologetic tone. Unexplained infertility, he'd said, his eyes flicking towards Clara. Sometimes Mr. and Mrs. Vance there are simply incompatibilities. The odds are astronomically low. But it was his mother Eleanor who had translated the medical jargon into a verdict. She did so over lunch at the Carlyle, her voice a perfectly modulated whisper that could cut glass. She's barren, Liam. It's a tragedy, of course, but a Vance needs to continue the line. You cannot sacrifice your legacy for a woman who cannot fulfill her most essential duty. Eleanor had never approved of Clara. Clara was the daughter of a university professor and a baker, a talented artist whose hands were more comfortable with charcoal and clay than with the cold calculus of high society. To Eleanor, Clara was a charming distraction who had overstayed her welcome. The infertility diagnosis was not a tragedy to Eleanor. It was an opportunity. Slowly, insidiously, Eleanor's poison had worked its way into Liam's heart. He began to see Clara's grief not as shared pain, but as a weakness. Her tears were manipulative. Her hope was naive. The pressure mounted at board meetings, at family dinners, in the silent, tense space in their bed. He grew distant, cold, echoing his mother's cruel logic. The final argument had been brutal. He'd thrown the doctor's words in her face, twisting a shared sorrow into a personal failing. Maybe my mother is right. He'd spat the words, tasting like ash. Maybe this just wasn't meant to be. Clara had looked at him, her beautiful brown eyes, once full of love, now shattered into a million pieces of betrayal. She hadn't screamed or cried. She had simply nodded, a profound and terrifying stillness coming over her. "If that's what you believe, Liam," she had said, her voice barely a whisper, "then there's nothing left to say." The divorce was swift and clinical. Eleanor's lawyers handled everything. Clara asked for nothing, not a cent of the Vance fortune, none of the properties, not even the art she had created that hung on their walls. She signed the papers and vanished from his life, leaving behind only a faint scent of lavender and the echoing silence of her absence. Now, 8 months later, Liam was living the life his mother had designed for him. He was dating Isabella Croft, a woman as pedigreed as a thoroughbred whose family owned a rival conglomerate. She was beautiful, intelligent, and as Eleanor frequently pointed out, came from excellent breeding stock. Their dates were photo ops. Their conversations were like negotiations. It was a partnership, not a passion. Tonight they were attending the Metropolitan Museum Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. Liam adjusted his tuxedo, the silk cool against his skin. He felt nothing. He was a perfect portrait of success, a man who had everything and felt nothing. "Ready, darling," Isabella called from the doorway, a vision in emerald silk. Liam plastered on a smile. Of course. As they descended in the private elevator, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his college friend Mark, who now lived a quiet life in Brooklyn. "You should check out the Grand Army Plaza Green Market tomorrow. They have the apple cider donuts you used to love. Might be good for your soul, man." Liam scoffed, typing back a quick, dismissive reply. A farmer's market. He didn't have time for such quaint common folk activities. He had a gala to attend, a dynasty to uphold. He had made his choice. He had cut out the weak link and was moving forward. He was fine. He was better off. He repeated the words to himself like a mantra, hoping that one day he might actually believe them. The gala was a glittering blur of champagne air kisses and conversations that skimmed the surface of meaning. Liam played his part perfectly, smiling for the cameras, with Isabella on his arm, discussing mergers with aging titans of industry, and accepting his mother's approving nods from across the room. Yet beneath the polished veneer, a strange restlessness gnawed at him. He felt like an actor in a play he hadn't auditioned for. The next morning, Liam woke with a throbbing headache and a profound sense of emptiness. The penthouse felt cavernous, the silence more oppressive than usual. Isabella had left early for a charity polo match in the Hamptons. He was alone with the ghost of his former life. On impulse, driven by a boredom so acute it felt like pain, he remembered Mark's text. A farmer's market. It was absurd. It was the kind of thing he and Clara used to do on lazy Saturday mornings, their fingers intertwined as they sampled artisanal cheeses and picked out fresh flowers. The memory sent a sharp, unwelcome pang through his chest. Maybe that was why he went. A self-destructive urge to poke the bruise to see if it still hurt. He bypassed his driver, taking a seldom-used Range Rover from his private garage. He traded his bespoke suit for a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, feeling like a man in a costume. The Grand Army Plaza Green Market was a riot of color and life that assaulted his senses. The air smelled of damp earth, roasting nuts, and sweet apples. Families pushed strollers, musicians played folksy tunes, and vendors shouted their wares. It was a world away from the sterile, air-conditioned corridors of his life. It was Clara's world. He bought a bag of the cider donuts Mark had recommended, the warm, sugary dough, a distant echo of a happier time. As he navigated the crowd, a sense of unease settled over him. Every woman with long, dark hair made his heart leap. He was chasing a ghost, and he knew it was pathetic. He was about to leave to retreat to the safety of his gilded cage when he saw her. It wasn't a trick of the light or a figment of his imagination. Standing by a stall selling heirloom tomatoes bathed in the soft glow of the autumn sun was Clara. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a loose braid that fell over her shoulder. She wore a simple flowing sundress and flat sandals. There was a serenity about her, a quiet confidence he had never seen before. The frantic, hopeful energy of their last few years together had been replaced by a deep, settled calm. She was laughing at something the vendor said, her head tilted back, her smile genuine and radiant. And then his world stopped. His eyes drifted down from her smiling face. Her hands were resting on her stomach. Not a flat stomach, but the full, round, unmistakable curve of a woman deep into her pregnancy. The bag of donuts slipped from his grasp, scattering in the dust. The sounds of the market faded into a dull roar. His mind, usually so sharp and analytical, struggled to process the information. Pregnant. Clara was pregnant. He did the math, his brain working like a frantic calculator. They had signed the divorce papers at the end of January. It was now late September. 8 months. He looked at her again, at the size and shape of her belly. She looked at least 7, maybe 8 months along. The timeline was a razor's edge. It was just close enough, just plausible enough. But it couldn't be. Their doctor, Dr. Miller, had been clear. They were incompatible. Her body couldn't carry a child. His mother had been clear. Clara was barren. It was the fact upon which he had dismantled his life, the justification for his cruelty, the foundation of his new empty existence. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over him, chasing away the shock. Betrayal. It had to be. She had moved on instantly. She had been with someone else either right before they split or immediately after. She had cheated. She had lied. The entire narrative of their tragic infertility was a lie she had constructed. He watched as she paid for her tomatoes and turned to leave her movements slow and deliberate. He had to know. He had to confront her. He started forward, his heart pounding a furious primitive rhythm against his ribs. The man who had everything was about to confront the one woman he had thrown away and demand an answer to a question he was terrified to ask. Liam moved through the crowd like a predator, his vision narrowing until only Clara was in focus. The casual market-goers parted before his determined stride, sensing the storm cloud of his mood. He reached her just as she was stepping away from the curb, a canvas bag full of produce slung over her shoulder. "Clara!" The name came out harsher than he intended, a clipped accusatory sound. She froze. For a moment she didn't turn her back, remaining a rigid wall. Then she took a slow, deep breath and turned to face him. Her eyes, those warm pools of brown, were wide with surprise, but not fear. There was a careful, guarded neutrality in her expression. "Liam," she said, her voice even and calm. It was the voice of a stranger acknowledging a passing acquaintance. His eyes immediately dropped back to her swollen belly, prominent and undeniable between them. "I see you've been busy," he said, the sarcasm dripping from every word. A flicker of something pain annoyance crossed her features before being replaced by that unnerving serenity. "I'm living my life," she replied simply. "As I'm sure you are." "My life isn't the one with the surprise." He gestured crudely towards her stomach. 8 months, Clara. It's been 8 months since the divorce. You look like you're due any day now." He wanted a reaction. He wanted tears, a confession, a flash of guilt. He wanted her to crumble to validate the anger that was churning in his gut. Instead, she placed a protective hand over her belly and met his gaze without flinching. "My timeline is my own," she said, her voice still quiet but now edged with steel. "It has nothing to do with you anymore." "Nothing to do with me," he scoffed, his voice rising. People were starting to stare. "We spent 3 years in and out of clinics. We spent a fortune. We ended our marriage because Dr. Miller told us it was impossible. And here you are, 8 months later, pregnant. You must think I'm a complete idiot." "What I think," Clara said, her chin lifting slightly, "is that you are making a scene. This is neither the time nor the place." "Then when is the time? Where is the place? Do you deny it? You were with someone else while we were still married, weren't you? All those nights you were working late at your studio?" The accusation was ugly and baseless, and a part of him knew it, but the rage was a blinding force. He was rewriting their history to fit this new, ugly reality. Clara's serene mask finally cracked. Her eyes flashed with a fire he hadn't seen since their worst fights. "You have no right to ask me that. You who stood there and called me broken based on the word of a man your mother recommended. You who chose your legacy over your wife. You gave up every right to my life, my body, and my future the moment you walked out that door." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't denying it. But she wasn't confirming it either. She was invalidating his question entirely, shutting him out with a finality that was more painful than any shouted confession. "So you won't tell me if the baby is mine?" He pressed his voice, lowering to a raw, desperate hiss. Clara looked at him, and for the first time he saw not anger, but a deep, profound pity. It was worse than her scorn. "The baby," she said, her voice softening as she cradled her stomach, "is mine. I am its mother. That is the only truth that matters now. You made your choice, Liam. You chose to believe I was the problem. You chose to listen to your mother. Now you need to live with that choice. And I need you to leave me alone." She turned, not waiting for a response, and began to walk away, her pace steady and unhurried. He watched her go, her form retreating through the vibrant, sun-drenched market. He was left standing there, surrounded by life, feeling more dead than ever. Her refusal was the key. If she had cheated, she would have screamed it at him, used it as a weapon to hurt him back. If the baby belonged to a new love, she might have said so with pride. But this calm, impenetrable wall of silence, it wasn't the response of a guilty person. It was the response of someone protecting a truth far more complex and far more painful than simple infidelity. The seed of doubt planted the moment he saw her began to sprout its thorny tendrils, wrapping around his heart. What if the lie wasn't hers? What if the lie was his? The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. Liam's mind, once a fortress of certainty, was now a chaotic battlefield. Clara's words echoed in the silent cabin of the Range Rover. "You chose to believe I was the problem." He stormed into his penthouse, the curated perfection of the space mocking him. He swept a multi-thousand-dollar vase off a pedestal, the crash of crystal on marble, doing little to quiet the noise in his head. He had built his new life on a single terrible fact: Clara was infertile. Now that foundation was cracking, and he felt himself plunging into the abyss below. He pulled out his laptop and began a frantic search, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He Googled misdiagnosed infertility, fertility clinic malpractice, false negative pregnancy tests. He was grasping at straws, trying to find a logical explanation that didn't involve the two most terrifying possibilities: that Clara had cheated, or that he had been monstrously, unforgivably wrong. His obsession became all-consuming. He canceled meetings, ignored Isabella's calls, and spent hours staring at the city lights, replaying every moment of his marriage. He started remembering things he had long since buried. He remembered Clara after a failed IVF cycle, curled up in bed, not crying, but just staring at the ceiling with a hollowed-out look in her eyes. He had sat beside her, distant and cold, thinking it was her failure. Now he saw it as their shared grief, a grief he had refused to share. He remembered her talking about a second opinion. "Don't you think it's strange, Liam, Dr. Miller is so final? Other doctors talk about options, different approaches. He just keeps saying, incompatible." He had dismissed her concerns, parroting his mother's reassurances. "Mother says Dr. Miller is the best in the country. He's handled all her friends' children. We have to trust the expert, Clara." Trust the expert. An expert his mother had handpicked. The thought was a jolt of electricity. He went to his home office, a room Clara had always hated, calling it cold. He tore through old file cabinets, looking for the medical records from their time at the clinic. He found the thick folder tucked away like a shameful secret. He spread the papers across his vast mahogany desk. Lab results, procedural summaries, consultation notes. It was a lexicon of their failure. He scanned the pages, his eyes blurring. He didn't know what he was looking for. Then he found it. A single page, a lab report for his own semen analysis. He remembered the day vaguely, the sterile room, the profound sense of humiliation. He'd never looked at the results. Dr. Miller had simply summarized them in a consultation, saying everything on his end was perfectly normal. But looking at the sheet now, he saw columns of numbers and medical terms he didn't understand. Morphology, motility, count. Next to several categories were asterisks with values that seemed to be flagged as below the standard range. He'd never noticed them before. Dr. Miller had glossed right over them. Why? He found Clara's reports. Page after page declared her unreceptive. Her hormonal levels suboptimal. Her tests consistently poor. It was a comprehensive damning case against her body. But looking at it now through the lens of suspicion, it felt too perfect, too neat. It was exactly the evidence one would need to convince a desperate man to leave his wife. The final piece clicked into place when he found an old invoice from the clinic. It was paid not from his and Clara's joint account, but from the Liam Vance Foundation, his mother's primary philanthropic and discretionary fund. The payment was dated just a week after their initial consultation, listed as a consultancy retainer. Why would his mother be paying the clinic directly? The air in the room grew thin. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a horror far deeper than the suspicion of infidelity. He had been so focused on Clara's potential betrayal that he had failed to see the one person who had always been pulling the strings. The one person who wanted Clara out of the picture from the very beginning, his mother. The possibility was monstrous, unthinkable. But as he sat there in the silence of his gilded cage, surrounded by the evidence of his own willful blindness, it was the only thing that made sense. The neat diagnosis, the hand-picked doctor, the paid invoice, and Clara gloriously and impossibly pregnant. He hadn't been a victim of circumstance. He had been a pawn, and he had sacrificed the woman he loved in a game he never even knew he was playing. The truth wasn't with Clara anymore. It was with Dr. Miller, and Liam knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had to find him. The next morning, Liam placed a call to Dr. Miller's office. He was met with a polite but firm receptionist. "I'm sorry, sir, Dr. Miller retired 6 months ago," she said. "He sold the practice and left no forwarding information." Retired. 6 months ago. Just 2 months after his divorce from Clara was finalized. The timing was too coincidental to be an accident. It was a loose end being neatly tied up. "Do you know where he moved?" Liam pressed, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. "It's a personal matter. A simple thank you." "I'm afraid I can't disclose that, sir. Patient privacy and all that," she replied, a practiced, unhelpful line. "All records have been transferred to the new practice director." This was Eleanor's work. He could feel her influence, her meticulous planning. A clean break, no traces left behind. But Eleanor had underestimated one thing: her son's newfound obsession, now fueled by the vast resources of Vance Industries. Liam hung up and immediately called his head of security, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Zev. "Zev, I need you to find someone," Liam said, his voice tight. "Dr. Alistair Miller, formerly of the Park Avenue Fertility Clinic. He retired about 6 months ago. I want to know where he is. I want to know what he had for breakfast this morning. Use whatever resources you need. Discretion is absolute." "Consider it done, Mr. Vance," Zev replied without a hint of curiosity. While Zev's team went to work, Liam's life began to unravel. He was a ghost at his own company, sitting in meetings with a vacant stare, his mind miles away. His relationship with Isabella, already built on a fragile foundation, began to crumble. She found him in his study late one night, surrounded by the medical files. "Liam, what is going on with you?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "You've barely said 2 words to me all week. My mother is asking if we've set a date for the engagement party." Liam looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in days. She was the perfect match, the woman his mother had chosen, and the thought made him feel sick. "I can't do this right now, Isabella," he said, his voice flat. "Can't do what? Talk to me, plan our future. This," he gestured vaguely around them. "Us. I need time." Isabella's perfectly composed face hardened. "This is about her, isn't it, your ex-wife? I heard you caused a scene at a farmer's market. Liam, it's over. Your mother told me how much she hurt you." His mother. Of course his mother had already spun a narrative for Isabella. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. "I know that you're throwing away what we have for a ghost," she retorted, her voice rising. "Whatever she is, whatever she's done, you need to let it go." "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What?" "I said get out, Isabella. Please." She stared at him, her eyes welling with tears of anger and disbelief before turning on her heel and stalking out of the room. The sound of the front door slamming shut echoed the closing of yet another chapter of his life. He was alone, and he deserved to be. 3 days later, Zev called. "We have him," Zev said. It wasn't easy. He moved twice. First to Florida, then he doubled back. He's in a small town in Vermont, Burlington. Bought a lakeside house all cash. Name of Alistair Miller. "Send me the address." Liam said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Vance, be careful." Zev added a rare note of warning in his professional tone. "People who run this hard are usually running for a reason." Liam booked a private jet. Within hours, he was descending through the clouds towards the lush green landscape of Vermont. It was a world away from the steel and glass of New York, a place where secrets could be buried under fallen leaves. He rented an anonymous sedan at the airport and drove towards the address Zev had given him. The house was modest, set back from the road, with a large porch overlooking the glittering expanse of Lake Champlain. It was the perfect picture of peaceful retirement. Liam parked the car down the road and watched the house. For a moment his resolve wavered. What if he was wrong? What if he was chasing a conspiracy that existed only in his head? What if he was about to terrorize an innocent old man and make a fool of himself? Then the front door opened. An older man with thinning gray hair and a nervous energy about him stepped out onto the porch. He held a pair of binoculars, scanning the lake with a jerky, anxious movement. It was Dr. Miller. Liam's doubt evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold certainty. He got out of the car. The confrontation he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times was about to become real. He was no longer chasing a phantom. He was about to face the man who held the key to the truth that had ruined his life. Liam walked up the gravel driveway, his footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet lakeside air. Dr. Miller was still on the porch, his back to the road. He didn't notice Liam's approach until he was at the bottom of the steps. "Enjoying your retirement, Doctor?" Liam's voice was low and even, but it cut through the chirping of the crickets like a razor. Dr. Miller spun around his face, instantly draining of all color. The binoculars slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the wooden planks of the porch. He looked at Liam as if he were seeing a ghost. "Vance," he stammered, his hand flying to his chest. "What are you... How did you find me?" "When you have enough money, you can find anyone," Liam said, taking a slow step up. "The question is, why did I have to look so hard? Why does a man with a successful Park Avenue practice suddenly sell everything and hide in Vermont?" Miller backed away, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. I wanted a quieter life. The city was too much." "I'm sure it was," Liam said, his voice hardening. He was on the porch now, standing just a few feet from the terrified man. "Especially when you're carrying the kind of secrets you are." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you—" Liam took another step forward. "Let's talk about my wife, my ex-wife, Clara. Let's talk about her medical files, page after page of damning results, hormonal imbalances, unreceptive lining, a textbook case of infertility. It all seems so neat, so perfect." Sweat beaded on Dr. Miller's forehead. "The tests were the tests. I reported what I saw." "Did you—" Liam's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I saw my ex-wife last week, Doctor. She's pregnant. About 8 months pregnant, I'd say. Now how does a barren woman, a woman you assured me had almost no chance of conceiving, manage that?" The doctor paled, stammering. "It could be a medical miracle. Sometimes. Stress." Liam laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Stop lying. I also pulled my own files. The ones you told me were perfectly normal. Funny thing, my own analysis shows multiple indicators below the standard range. Things that might cause difficulty conceiving. Things that are often treatable. You never mentioned that, did you? You put it all on her." Dr. Miller finally broke. His shoulders slumped in defeat, the fight draining out of him. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She was very persuasive." You mean my mother, Eleanor Vance?" The doctor flinched at the name, a clear confirmation. He sank into a wicker chair on the porch, his face in his hands. "Tell me everything," Liam commanded. "Now." And so the story spilled out, a sordid, pathetic tale of greed and weakness. Eleanor Vance had approached Dr. Miller before Liam and Clara's first appointment. His practice was in financial trouble, a fact she had somehow discovered. She made him an offer, a grant from her foundation enough to solve all his problems and fund his comfortable retirement. In return, he was to ensure that the marriage failed. He was to falsify Clara's test results, exaggerating any minor anomaly into a catastrophic problem. He was to downplay Liam's own minor fertility issues, making him seem perfect and blameless. He was to create a medical narrative so hopeless that Liam would have no choice but to seek a divorce to secure the family line. "She knew about your issues," Miller confessed, his voice muffled by his hands. "An old physical from years ago. They were minor. A simple hormonal treatment, a lifestyle change. It likely would have solved everything, but she didn't want it solved. She wanted Clara gone." Liam felt a profound, sickening hollowness spread through his chest. It was all true. The monstrous, unthinkable possibility was the reality. His mother had not just manipulated him. She had orchestrated the complete destruction of his marriage, of his love of Clara's life. And Dr. Miller, for a house on a lake, had been her willing accomplice. "The records. You falsified them?" Liam asked, his voice hoarse. "I altered the numbers. It was easy. No one ever questions a doctor's report, especially when it's what they want to hear," Miller admitted. "Your mother paid me the first installment after the diagnosis, and the final payment cleared the day your divorce was finalized." The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Clara hadn't cheated. She hadn't been with anyone else. The baby was his. She must have gotten pregnant in their final weeks together, a 1 in a million chance, a miracle that had defied even his mother's meticulous plotting. She must have found out after she left him. And she kept it a secret, knowing that the man who had called her broken would at his mother's command try to take her child. The rage he felt was so pure, so absolute, it was almost calming. He knew what he had to do. He looked down at the pathetic, broken man in the chair. "You're going to give me everything, Dr. Miller. Copies of the original, unaltered test results for both me and Clara. A signed, notarized affidavit detailing my mother's entire scheme, including the payment records. You will give it to me, or I will spend the rest of my life and the full extent of the Vance fortune ensuring that you not only lose this house, but you die in a prison cell for fraud, malpractice, and conspiracy." Dr. Miller looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Liam had the truth. But the truth wasn't a comfort. It was a weapon. And he was heading back to New York to aim it directly at the heart of the Vance dynasty. Liam returned to New York under the cover of darkness, the damning file from Dr. Miller feeling as heavy as a tombstone in his briefcase. He didn't go to his penthouse. He went to the place where the lie began, his mother's sprawling townhouse on the Upper East Side. He let himself in with his own key, the silence of the grand foyer greeting him like an old enemy. He found her in the library, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with leather-bound books she'd never read. She sat in a high-backed chair, a glass of sherry in her hand, the picture of aristocratic control. "Liam, darling," she said, a perfectly manicured eyebrow raising in mild surprise. "To what do I owe this unscheduled visit? Is everything all right with Isabella?" "Isabella and I are over," Liam said, his voice flat. He walked to the center of the room, placing his briefcase on a polished antique table. He clicked it open. "A lover's quarrel, I'm sure. She's a good match for you, Liam. You mustn't let—" "I paid a visit to Dr. Miller in Vermont," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her placid tone. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes, a flicker of cold, hard panic, gave her away. "Dr. Miller. The fertility doctor. How provincial. I hope he's enjoying his retirement." He's not, Liam said, pulling a sheaf of papers from the briefcase and spreading them on the table. He's terrified, because he gave me these. He laid out the documents one by one. The original lab reports showing his treatable condition. The falsified reports for Clara. Bank statements showing the wire transfers from her foundation. And on top, a multi-page signed and notarized confession from Dr. Alistair Miller detailing every step of her conspiracy. Eleanor stared at the papers, her composure finally cracking. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of pure fury. "That man is a liar," she hissed, her voice losing its cultured smoothness. "A desperate, pathetic man trying to extort money from us." "Is he?" Liam's voice was dangerously calm. He seemed more desperate to avoid a life sentence for fraud. He was very thorough. He remembered every detail of your conversations. She stood up, her regal facade crumbling into raw anger. "I did it for you. For this family, that woman was a baker's daughter who was never going to give you an heir. She was a dead end, a mistake. I corrected it. I found you a suitable partner in Isabella. I was securing your future, our legacy. My legacy." Liam laughed, a hollow, broken sound that echoed in the silent room. "What legacy?" "A line of loveless marriages and hollow men who do your bidding. You didn't secure my future, Mother. You destroyed it. You took the woman I loved, you systematically broke her heart, and you used me as your weapon to do it. You turned me into a monster." "Love doesn't build empires, Liam," she shot back. "Duty does sacrifice." "That wasn't sacrifice. That was cruelty," he said, his voice dropping. "And you weren't just wrong. You failed. Clara is pregnant. She's 8 months pregnant. It happened right under your nose. A little miracle that defied your spreadsheets and your schemes. And the baby? The baby is mine." The final revelation hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. The idea that Clara, the barren girl, was carrying the true Vance heir was a failure of such epic proportions that her mind couldn't compute it. "I saw her," Liam continued, pressing his advantage. "I accused her of cheating. I threw your lies in her face, and she just stood there and took it to protect her child from me. From you." The fight went out of her. She sank back into her chair, looking old and defeated. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "First," Liam said, gathering the papers, "you will never contact me again. You will not try to see my child. You will not interfere in my life in any way. As far as the world is concerned, we are estranged. Zev will handle the details." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Second, you are going to transfer a controlling interest of the Vance Foundation into a new trust. A trust in Clara Rossi's name. You are going to give her back a piece of the power you used to ruin her life. It won't fix what you did, but it's a start." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with a venomous disbelief. "You would choose her over your own family?" "She is my family," Liam said, the realization hitting him with the force of absolute truth. "She and our child. You are just the woman who tried to destroy it." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving his mother alone amidst the ruins of her empire. He didn't look back. The gilded cage was behind him. Now he had to face his hardest challenge yet, trying to earn the forgiveness of the woman whose life he had shattered. Forgiveness was not a debt that could be paid or a transaction that could be negotiated. Liam Vance, a man who had spent his life dealing in acquisitions and mergers, was finally learning this lesson. He couldn't buy back Clara's trust or leverage his way into her heart. He was a man stripped of his usual tools, left with only the raw, useless weight of the truth. The week that followed his confrontation with his mother was a systematic demolition of his former life. He sat in a sterile conference room with a team of lawyers, his voice a cold monotone as he dictated the terms of his professional separation from Eleanor. He signed papers that redirected a staggering portion of his inheritance into a blind trust, its sole beneficiary listed as Clara Rossi. The pen felt impossibly heavy in his hand. This wasn't generosity. It was restitution, a pathetic attempt to pay for a wound that could never be quantified in dollars. It felt like trying to patch a gaping hole in the universe with a single banknote. His final act was to walk through the penthouse one last time. The movers had already stripped it bare, leaving behind an echoing tomb of white walls and gray marble. All that was left was a small forgotten object on a windowsill, a smooth gray stone that Clara had picked up on their honeymoon in Big Sur. He remembered her pressing it into his palm, her eyes alight with joy. "So you never forget the ocean," she'd said. He had forgotten. He had forgotten everything that mattered. He closed his fist around the stone, its cold smoothness a painful reminder, and walked out without looking back. Finding her was the easy part. Approaching her was the hardest thing he had ever done. He drove himself to Park Slope, the anonymous sedan, feeling like a foreign vessel. As he crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the glittering vertical towers of Manhattan receded in his rearview mirror, a monument to his ambition and his failure. Her neighborhood was a different world entirely. Here the buildings were made of warm brownstone, not cold glass. Ancient trees lined the streets, their autumn leaves forming a golden carpet on the sidewalks. He saw children laughing as they rode scooters and neighbors stopping to chat on their stoops. It was a world of connection, the very thing he had systematically erased from his own life. He parked across the street from her building and simply watched for what felt like an hour. Every shadow, every curtain twitch sent a jolt of panic through him. The urge to flee was a physical sickness in his gut. He could just drive away, send the file through a lawyer, and disappear. It would be the clean, cowardly option, the choice his mother would have made. But then he imagined a small child, years from now, asking Clara about their father. He could not bear the thought of that child knowing him only as the man who broke their mother's heart and then vanished. That thought, and that thought alone, propelled him out of the car. He stood on her doorstep, his heart hammering against his ribs. He took a deep breath that did nothing to calm him and pressed the buzzer for her apartment. A few moments of agonizing silence passed before the intercom crackled to life. "Yes." Her voice was cautious, guarded. "Clara, it's Liam." The silence that followed was heavy with everything left unsaid between them. He could practically feel her resolve hardening through the electronic speaker. "There's nothing for us to talk about, Liam. Please go." "Clara, wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to give you something. The truth. It's about Dr. Miller. I know what really happened." He had gambled that the doctor's name would be the one key that could unlock the door. Another long pause stretched, and he held his breath. Finally, with a resigned sigh that was more weary than angry, the sharp buzz of the lock releasing echoed on the quiet street. Her apartment was just as he had imagined, a sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of oil paint, turpentine, and brewing tea filled the space. Her canvases were everywhere, vibrant and alive with color and emotion so different from the muted, sorrowful abstracts she had painted in their last year together. In a corner, a simple wooden crib stood half assembled, a stack of parenting books beside it. The sight of it, so real and domestic, made his throat tighten. She stood by the door, a formidable guardian of her new life. Her hand was on her belly, a gesture he now understood was not just protective, but profoundly proud. He remained on the threshold, not daring to cross into her sacred space. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You mentioned Dr. Miller," she stated, cutting through any pleasantries. "You have 5 minutes." "I don't need 5 minutes to tell you I'm sorry," he began, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I need a lifetime for that, but I can use them to show you why." He opened his briefcase and took out the file, a thick manila folder that felt like the black box recovered from a plane crash. He didn't hand it to her. He knelt, a gesture of complete surrender, and placed it on the floor between them. "I'm apologizing for the right thing this time, not for a failed marriage, but for my complete and utter failure as a man." Slowly, painfully, he unburdened himself of the whole ugly truth. He spoke of his mother's meticulous, cruel conspiracy. He detailed the falsified lab reports, the secret payments, the lies layered upon lies. He didn't spare himself describing his own weak-willed acceptance of the narrative, his arrogance, his cruelty during their final fight. As he spoke, he watched the cascade of emotions on her face. Her initial tired defensiveness melted into confusion, then widened into sheer stunned disbelief. Her hand resting on her belly began to tremble. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, then another. But these weren't the tears of grief he had once callously dismissed. These were the tears of a prisoner who, after years of being told she was guilty, was finally being exonerated. The validation was so profound it was painful to watch. She staggered back and sank onto a small armchair, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the weight of a lie she had carried for years finally lifted. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. I know this doesn't fix it," he whispered, his own voice choked with unshed tears. "What I did, what I allowed to happen, is unforgivable. I destroyed us, Clara. I threw you away because I was a coward, too afraid to stand up to my mother, and too arrogant to question the story that made me blameless. I will carry that shame for every second of the rest of my life." He finally lifted his eyes to meet hers, letting her see the raw, unfiltered devastation in his soul. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I lost that right. I'm not asking you to take me back. I could never deserve you." He glanced at her belly, at the life they had created against all odds. "I'm just asking for a chance to be his father, or hers. I want to earn the right to be a part of our child's life in whatever way you'll allow. I'll follow any rule, any boundary. I just want our child to know that their father, however late, finally learned the truth and spent the rest of his life trying to make amends." Clara stared at him, her chest rising and falling with deep, shuddering breaths. She looked from his broken form on the floor to the file that contained her vindication. The pain was still there, etched into her features, but beneath it was a flicker of something new, a dawning clarity. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky but firm. "Get up, Liam." He flinched, expecting the command to be followed by, "and get out." Instead, she took a steadying breath. "Stand up, and come inside. We have a lot to talk about." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a summons. A necessary first step into the wreckage of their past, not for them, but for the future that was quietly growing within her. For Liam, kneeling on the floor of the life he had thrown away, it was the first ray of light in an endless self-inflicted night. Liam and Clara's journey is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried by lies and manipulation, always finds its way to the light. It's a story about the devastating consequences of choosing legacy over love and the difficult, humbling path to redemption. The road ahead for them is not easy, but with the truth finally between them, they have a chance to build a new future, not as husband and wife, but as parents to a child who was a miracle in more ways than one. If this story of betrayal, discovery, and the fight for family resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, as it truly helps our channel grow. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale that uncovers the hidden truths of the human heart. We want to hear from you. Comment below. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Would you have let Liam back in? Let's discuss it. Thank you for listening.